Has the magic started? Is this the magic? Are we in the magic?
Are we live? Okay, fantastic.
This is the magic now.
We're going to stray away from the stories a little bit today and talk a bit more anything storytelling.
Yeah.
And conversations around how to be a good storyteller.
We're looking quite tense, you and me.
Or maybe we should
Aren't we?
chill out
That's
a little
not
bit more. Sit more like
We need
this.
to be like
and rule
cigarette.
number one in storytelling:
Don't be tense.
don't be tense.
Yeah.
Find a comfortable position.
Yeah.
And press play.
And don't move, otherwise Christo gets cross.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Christo's here as well, outside the camera today, but here in spirit. Here with Klaus, or in-house storyteller extraordinaire. We're gonna share some thoughts on how to become a good storyteller, I guess, and how to read a good story, how to come up with a good story, how to be the best sort of bedtime mom or dad or granddad or grandma or uncle or friend or whatever it might be in the world, and how to tell stories for kids, how to tell stories for adults. Yeah, where do we start?
Well, I think the interesting thing is that when you have children, or if you have grandchildren, or if you're an aunt or uncle, the storytelling is a great way to connect with those children in your life. And I think everyone wants to be the best storyteller, because it's that way to connect, it's that way to kind of get engagement, it's the way to make things fun. And there's a tradition of storytelling. You know, you go to any bookshop, and sometimes there are just simply children's bookshops as opposed to just bookshops in general. So it's a huge thing. And I remember when my daughter was probably too young to even really engage with what I'm doing, and I was so enthusiastic. And of course, as you get older as a parent, your enthusiasm and your energy runs out. But I remember thinking, I've got to make this. I was going for the character voices and all that kind of stuff. And then
Is this reading a story or
reading
coming
a
up
story.
with a story?
Well, the thing is, there was a point. So I was reading stories, and then there was there's that element of, are you sat there with them reading a story? So, for example, on the sofa. So that's one thing. And then there's also the kind of going to bed and sitting either by the bed or in the bed with the child and doing that way. And I think both are really, really powerful. But the thing that I enjoyed, and we talked about this before, is that the idea that you're doing the story, you're reading the characters. There's an element of you're reading it going, well, I'm going to say something different. So what's written down, the greatest stories are the ones where you don't feel that you have to change it. But there are so many stories, and there's so many parents, I think, who read a book and they go, well, I could do this. You know, you kind of go, well, why would that character say that? Or I'm going to rephrase it or something like that. And then that sort of automatically takes you on that path of, do you know what, I'm going to make up my own stories. And how can I do that, and how can I make it engaging? And of course, we all want to do that and be a great storyteller.
And I guess we all sort of within ourselves as parents or uncles and so forth think we are amazing at it. You know, we think we are incredible at, we are so creative. You know, we can come up with stories, no problem, and they're going to be fantastic. The kids are going to remember them forever, and they're going to think about me and all that kind of stuff. But the fact is that we're probably not that good at it, because we don't do it so often. And,
well, there's that.
And there are, and we start, and then we just get lost, and we just lose our way in the process of making them. If it's off the cuff.
Yeah.
So maybe we should look into, and could you give some tips on, are there any recipes or any processes that could make that process easier?
Yeah.
Are there things that we can sort of hook the story on, and tags and so forth to make them flow a little bit better? And as we talked about before, all stories are very similar when you slim them down to the sort of the bare minimum. And I'm sure you'll go through that with us. But what recommendations would you give?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to say that I think we are all good at storytelling, and we do it all the time. So for example, you're saying, we're not that good at it. I think we are, but I think all of a sudden when we try and tell a story, we're trying to force it. And I think we just have to rely on, there are certain things you can do to help you, but we all behave differently with different people in our lives. So we have different relationships with our parents, with the grandparents, with our children, with teachers, whatever. It might be. So we're always playing a role. And I think storytelling is about playing a series of roles within different characters. And if you can apply that, so that's one part you can do, and be really use, with regards to character and readings and being in the character, making believable characters, you can base that on people that you know. So whether that's famous people, whether that's people in your life, it's a really great way in, as opposed to thinking, what voice am I going to do for this character? How does this person speak? Then you just use someone that you already know. So that's key. And the second thing is about using the structure. So for me, I would always, and my daughter now, she's 7, just about to turn 8, and this is quite a funny thing, slightly off topic, but I've kind of created a rod for my own back. So every time we get in a car now, she's like, should we do a story? And I'm like, oh yeah. And of course you want to do it. But it's like, and this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to go, right, we're in the car. This is quality time, right? We don't need to have music on necessarily. We don't need to be playing a game. We can tell a story. I can get her engaged in stories and stuff. And now, of course, she loves it. And I'm exhausted because I think, how many stories can you tell? But once you get into it, then you can get going. So
how do you do that? How did that start? And how does it work? Like, how do you do it?
Right. Well, so for me, I have the 3 Ps. I have people, place, problem. So that's how you get into a story in the first place. If you think any story fits in with that, so you've got to have a character, people, you've got to have a place. Where is it taking place?
But you didn't start with Ava. Okay, Ava, remember the 3 Ps. This is what we're gonna do.
No, I did.
Did you really?
No, when I'm telling her a story.
Well,
I just think when to do with my teaching and everything, I kind of and so.
You sound like a really fun teacher.
I'm amazing. No, but so I've done a lot of drama teaching, and I was an actor and all that kind of thing. So if you're talking about giving, you really need to break things down into the fundamentals when you're giving children a structure. So for example, you could say, right, okay, make up a story. But some drama teachers, for example, might say, make up a story, go for it. Then children need a structure. Everyone needs a structure. There's too much creative space to draw from. So then you go, right, okay. People, place, problem. That at least gets them in the door and gets them working. Right, we've got to know who we are, we've got to know where we are, and there's got to be a problem that we've got to solve. So those are the 3 Ps. So when you're telling a story, that's a great thing to do. So for example, and you can subvert that as well. And again, as soon as I started doing the stories with Ava and she wanted to tell stories, I would say, well, these are the 3 things you need. She got it. And I think we underestimate how children, they can grasp those simple structures. So for example, if you had a mouse and he was in his house, which is a nice rhyme, but then you have a mouse that's in the desert, or you have a mouse that's in a windmill, or if you have a mouse that's in space, all of a sudden, the options then change. So then the third thing is influenced by the first 2. So you've got a mouse who's in space, and what's the problem? What's the problem? Go.
He's running out of air.
He's running out of air. I mean, all of a sudden, we've got a major issue. Maybe he's running out of cheese and air, so that would make it funny.
Gravity.
Or he's running, yeah.
He's not running out of gravity, but this could be the
or maybe the cheese is on
gravity.
the other side of the room, and there's no gravity, and he can't get there because he can't move quick enough through the air.
Exactly. Even you saying these 3 Ps, Frey, my 3-year-old, I think I'm a fantastic storyteller, and then we're sitting in bed, and I'm telling a story. And it just ends up going in a direction that makes 0 sense. Luckily, it's to get him to sleep, so maybe that's the right strategy. But I'm finding myself going like, I thought I was better than that. But you're saying these 3 Ps already puts a structure to it, and it makes it so much easier. I'm already having all these stories about that mice in space, and it just simplifies it, right?
It does. It gives you something to hang on. And I think there's a danger when someone says, I used to do some workshops on creativity and improvisation, and you need a structure. So for example, if there is a great there's a great exercise where you look at, so step 1 of the exercise, you look at something and you say what it is. So microphone, Marius, board, light, whatever it is. Okay, and then you do you look at something and you point at the thing before. So you would go microphone, Marius, light. So you're pointing at the thing before. So that's kind of a little bit of a mind game. The next step would be point at something and say something completely random. not what you're pointing at. And all of a sudden, because you can say anything in the world, you can't say anything at all. Because it's like, you have that freeze. And I think that's what we tend to get into when we're trying to use our creative brain. So then you give your creative brain a structure. So then you use the alphabet. So you don't need to tell anyone you're doing that. So when you're using, alphabet is a great thing because it's something we all know ABCD. So then you kind of go, right, so suddenly you can be creative. So you can say apple, banana, Charlie. Do you know what I mean? So you're suddenly giving it, and you can do that within a story. So for example, if you're stuck about a character's name, you just use the alphabet. I mean, you can start where you want. You can start at A, you can start at P. It doesn't matter. But the point is, if you're stuck creatively, use a structure that you know. So for example, if you want there to be a problem, then you go, right, where are we? A, B, C. I'm going to start in C. So the problem starts with C. Suddenly you're going, right, you're laser focusing down. This problem has to be starting with C. So the problem would be begins with
carrot storm.
A carrot storm.
Carrot storm in space.
A carrot storm in space. I mean, I was going to go for cat.
Fair enough.
Because there was a mouse, but I prefer your one, right?
That would be the obvious answer.
But that's too obvious, right? But then the cat has got something wrong with him that begins with D, because then you're using the alphabet to give yourself a structure. So then the cat is dead. No, maybe not. The cat is dead. But do you see what I mean? Give yourself a structure, because otherwise the idea of I can do anything is overwhelming and it stops you from actually being creative. So give yourself a structure to be creative.
Yeah, so the key is the structure.
Yeah.
And I guess also if you look at any kind of storytelling, which is also movies, all the fantastic or favorite movies build storytelling, basically. And if you think that, okay, I would love to create the manuscript for a movie, and a lot of people will think that, and then you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm going to write something, and you're like, where do I start? Where do I go?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like inventing something new. Or music, it's sort of the same process.
Yeah.
You don't sit down and go, okay, I just have a clean canvas there, I'm just going to make a song. Where do you start?
Yeah.
Everybody who writes a story, makes a manuscript, creates a song,
Makes a table.
they have a recipe.
Anything.
Yeah, and they have structure.
Yeah.
They know where to start. They know where the bridge are. They know in the story where the journey the character is going to go on, the trials and tribulations he's going to have, the enlightenment of someone, the return. In a song, you know where the chorus is going to be, you know how to build it up to it, the bridge, blah, 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 blah.
But then you subvert it, because you go, well, that's my structure, but now I know that, and within that structure, I can then subvert the structure, and also because there's an expectation, people understand, whether it's subconsciously or whether it's something that we are aware of. If you're going to write a script, you can go on Amazon now and you can buy, or other shops, and you can basically find any kind of how to write a script. And it's like on page 3, the character has to do this. On page 5, this is when this happens. So if you need the structure of doing a story, there is a formula, which is widely accepted. And the interesting thing is when you watch a movie or hear a story which doesn't fit in with those parameters, like the hero's journey, all of a sudden you feel a little bit lost. Whether we know it or not, we are susceptible and we are expecting certain things to happen within a story. And when it doesn't happen, we're a little bit, I think because we're so conditioned to hear stories in a certain structure that it suddenly becomes confusing to us. But when you were talking about creating your own stories and going, well, where is this going? I mean, all you have to do is look at Alice in Wonderland. That isn't like an acid trip. And but within every situation, you've got people place problem, right? So she goes to a series of chapters, or Pinocchio. It's that thing, something episodic doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a great story.
But what you're also saying is that if it's Star Wars or Pinocchio or Grandpa's stories when you were sitting on his lap, when he was any good story boils down to the same thing in essence, which is person, product placement. What was it again?
No, people place problem. But people place problem is how you get into the story. And then obviously
plays problem.
Yeah.
But and then you have the journey of the story. So
exactly.
so you start with people plays problem.
That's to get you in.
That's to get you in.
That's
and that happens like that. So even if you're writing a manuscript or you're sitting in bed with your son or daughter and you want to sort of they go, Dad, tell me a story. Boom. PPP. Start. Then when you get going, there is a second structure. So what's the root of the story? What's the how is the timeline of the story? And then we can go into something we've referred to on several occasions, which is what you referred to earlier. That's the hero's journey. And what is that? Like, how is that the structure, and how simple is that, and how is everything sort of building on that in terms of storytelling and stories, that being a grandpa telling a story, or as we said, Star Wars or Pinocchio?
Well, I think, and it's well known and documented, the idea of the hero's journey, and you can boil it down very simply. If you're talking about children's telling sort of a bedtime children's story, it's about you've got the characters, and they have something that they have to overcome, and then at the end there is sort of a resolve. But because that's pleasing to us, that's why storytelling has lasted for thousands and thousands of years. Before it was written down, it was told, because there is an element of satisfaction about a story, and you can relate it to anything. So, for example, whether you're a grown-up going through your own journey, there are a series of challenges that you have to overcome in order to have some kind of resolve. And it's nice to within chapters, for example. So, for example, within the chapter of your life, you break it down.
So you could look at your life story. It breaks down to the same as the story you would tell for bedtime.
Yeah, absolutely. I think stories are all the same. I can't remember. Within movies, I think there's an adage that there are sort of 6 stories, and every story that's been told within movies fits within. So it's like Stranger Comes to Town, the hero's journey. There are a number of stories which are almost templates, and then again, like I said, you can subvert those templates, but they pretty much all stories fit within those sort of 6 or 7 stories. I think, yes,
getting awfully complicated.
It is a little bit. So, but the idea is that you have there are things that a protagonist character will overcome, and then there will be a resolve at the end. I think if you're thinking about it with regards to that, and I'm trying to think about what I would do when I'm telling stories to my daughter, or when she's telling stories to me, there's a nice thing. Once you get good at it, you can sort of subvert those things. But when it comes down to it, really, there has to be some kind of resolve. And so whether it's that...
Or very, very often they're going to be asleep before that resolve happens, probably, as well.
No, not with my stories.
Oh, really? Did you actually want to keep them awake with your stories? Because I tend to wanting to dull them to sleep with mine. So, I think, depending on when they are, obviously. But
then they won't get this. They won't hear... Well, do you know that? Well, that's a very interesting thing. That, I mean, there are sort of stories, there are books that you can get which are incredibly long, and the idea is that you're supposed to be, and sometimes I think you get audio versions of, they're designed, I think sort of rabbit falls asleep or bear has a nap or whatever it might be, but those things, and I've never used those, but they are told in a way that are very slow. You turn the lights down, you make it very low, you almost make it monotonous. And I would say that I've never really got engaged in those kind of things, because I just think I want my daughter to hear the end of the story.
No, of course. So I was reading something very interesting actually this morning, and having this podcast in mind, probably why it sort of spoke to me there and then, and it was about something called hypnagogia. It's a difficult word, and I had to ask you as a teacher on how I was going to pronounce it,
and I don't know if that's right.
Probably not.
Hypnagogia.
Yeah,
could be.
Who knows? And it is that state just before you fall asleep.
Right.
Muscle jerks or where you have those lucid dreams for a few seconds. That's like seems like an eternity, but it's actually a very short time.
Right.
And there's been a lot of research on that, and obviously this happens in every bedtime. And if you're doing a bedtime story, and your child is just about to drift away within it, that little space, which is called hypnagogia, or hypnagogia, or maybe someone can lecture us on how to pronounce it, is shown to be one of the most creative states to be in. And when they gave people, in the research, they gave people tasks or problems, and the people who, by trying to resolve this task, went into that little hypnagogia space of seconds, had a much higher success rate of creating or solving the problem. And I think they're very much linked neurologically with the same sectors in the brain that is dealing with creativity and so on. So I was thinking, linking that with bedtime stories and so on. And if your kid is tired and just about to drift away while you are telling the story, is that maybe when they remember that special story, or it takes it further? Is there some huge benefit of bedtime stories and that can be linked to that thing?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, again, it's not something I was aware of, but I mean, it does make sense that when you are, when you are calm and when you perhaps when you are tired, then you're able to be more creative because you don't have the sort of inner anxieties that we might have during the day. So you're almost in a relaxed state and easily influenced. So therefore, which is an incredible time to tell stories, especially if there's some kind of, and a lot of the Hans Christian Andersen stories have sort of moral included, and so, or Aesop's fables, all these classic stories have those, there are life lessons within there. So that's a great time to tell them.
Maybe bedtime stories are even more important than just for the story and just for the entertainment. Maybe there is something more in there that time is the time to pick up extra little things that might have not been picked up from that story. In the daytime. And maybe that's why bedtime stories is a thing in general from way back, right? Why do we want to listen to a story just before we fall asleep? Strange concept, really, isn't it? But maybe that little phase of creativity and picking and sucking up these things is subconsciously why we've always been doing bedtime stories.
It could be, yeah. I mean,
and now we know more about it.
Well, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Now they can do the studies and they can work that out. But it's being able to influence, it's being able to connect. It's stories are an empathy machine, aren't they? So, for example, the idea is that you can create a story which the characters don't exist, they've never existed, the place doesn't exist. You can create something completely out of nowhere, which can create emotions, connection, you can teach with it, all of those incredible things you can do with story, and also you're connecting with another human being. So
yourself, both as a teller and a listener. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're sort of pushing yourself. We talked earlier in the podcast about the idea that you want to become a good storyteller, and so that's a skill, and so therefore there are things that you can employ to make yourself a better storyteller. But essentially, it's about just doing it. It's the 1,000 hours, or 10,000 hours, or whatever you need to do. You need to get better at it. There are going to be some days, and I have that, some days where I'm thinking, well, that story didn't make any sense. But that's more about me just going, oh, but then sometimes things happen and they pop into your brain. You can help yourself with the structures, but...
Would you say it's important also to follow up on the stories, have one sort of main stories that you make more episodes of so that it's relatable and recognizable, these characters? Would you say that's more important than always having new stories? Maybe one that is following up on the previous one as well?
I think that might be child-led. I think, for example, I've had that with Ava. She says, oh, let's do another story. She either wants to do the same story again, or she goes, part two. Let's do part two. Yeah. So then you suddenly go, oh, well, that's obviously, there's something about that story which she really engaged with, whether that was... And obviously, the nice thing is you can ask, and then you've got a nice conversation about these... It's magical. You're talking about people, characters, situations that never existed. And all of a sudden you're having a conversation with your child or with your grandchild or with your niece or nephew, whatever it might be. And I think that's lovely. And that's the power of stories. So there's so many things. There's connection. There's an ability to tell. There's sort of a moral there. There's characters who are going through things. I remember there was a situation where a friend of mine's, this is before my daughter was born, but a friend of mine's son was over, and he was saying, Louis keeps running into the road. And instead of kind of saying, don't run into the road, because there's only times you can say that, he's still going to do it. Because also there's the psychology of you, the word don't is at the beginning, but what he's hearing is run into the road, right? Yeah. So then you distract, and we sat down and we were saying, I said, oh, there was a little boy once who ran into the road. Immediately he's in the story. Yep. And because it's not about him, and he's taking it away, and there was an opportunity then for him to be open and open-eyed and listening about this character and what happened and what was the result. So then the opportunity to teach. And
so that's using stories to achieve something different, but you can also use features to enhance your storytelling, like shadow puppets and is that what it's called?
Oh yeah, or just
shadow
with the light on the wall.
or-
Yeah, I guess you can.
and so on, to sort of bring it to life. I use that as a trick just to turn the lights down after books as well,
Right,
because
right,
you
okay.
do want them to fall asleep at some point. I'm sure you don't keep them up all night with your engaging stories, and well, maybe.
But I think that's a really interesting point. Is that I think there's a tendency and there's a pressure on parents to do more and to be the best and to make sure that your children really, they just need to know that you're connected and that you love them, really. I mean, the storytellers are extra, and it's lovely that you can do
They only
it,
need
but
to
to not
believe you're
judge.
the best.
They need it. Yeah, exactly.
That's enough.
No, that's enough. But that's enough, and it's about they're not comparing you with someone else. They, are they? Unless Grandad comes in and does a great job, and then you suddenly got to raise the bar. But I think it's more about the connection. The quality of the storytelling isn't that important. It's fun to do and it's lovely for them and the characters. But I think there's an important thing as parents to take the pressure off ourselves and not to judge ourselves or to judge others. Unless someone is a really bad storyteller, then you must tell them they're terrible and they must
Stop.
never.
Just stop.
No, of course not.
So just to recap for everybody at home and all the future storytellers who wants to test out all this, 3 Ps. Go.
People, place, problems. So you've got to know who they are.
Yeah.
You've got to know where they are, and you've got to have something that they've got to overcome.
Then for the creativity part of it, alphabet. Start on A,
Yeah.
B.
Well, it doesn't have to be A, but start somewhere within the alphabet. A is always an obvious
Start at
choice.
the back.
You start at the back. Go backwards, but that might confuse you. The idea is that if you're suddenly, someone says, right, be creative, come up with something, it's too much. It's overwhelming. So you want to avoid the overwhelm. Whenever you can, use the alphabet. So if you're coming up with a character name, if you're coming up with something that's happening within the story, then work through your alphabet. So that's a great way to do it.
Boom.
The other thing was talking about characters, is basing your characters on people that you know, because that's a really nice way to do it. Another way as well is using animals, because animals that takes it away. It kind of makes it more fun and more engaging, which is why there are so many storybooks which have animals,
So 3 Ps.
Yep.
Alphabet for creativity.
Yeah.
Base your character on someone you know.
Yep.
Which we know, like most movies and series and so on are based on the creators
Yep.
who's inspired them for good or bad. Animals.
Yep.
And the last thing was the timeline, the journey.
Yes, absolutely.
Where does it start? Your character is either pushed into a journey or decides to go on a journey.
Yep.
They're not just sitting there in front of their computer at home, sort of like playing games every day. It's something happens to them.
Yeah,
to bring them
or if
on.
it's the Matrix, he is at the computer and then he realizes
Exactly.
that,
Let's not go too complicated. We can go for hours. Journey, trials and tribulations. Something happens to them. It changes them.
Yeah.
They succeed or fail and succeed. Wherever the story goes, they return full
Yeah.
circles as with something new
Yeah.
that they can give back to sort of the starting point.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
They've got to be a journey, but the hero's journey is, they come back to where they were and realize that it's one of those things, isn't it, where which is it's the same thing in life. You kind of go on this journey, you come back to where you are and you go, actually, I'm different. I'm in the same place, but things are different because I'm different. So you can look at The Hobbit, you can look at Star Wars, he ends up back on Tatooine.
That's why all these
Harry
stories
Potter.
speaks to us so well,
Absolutely.
because we subconsciously
real life.
link them to our real lives as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So some kind of resolve, especially when you're telling children sort of bedtime stories,
If
the
they're
resolve
not
is really key. If they have not fallen asleep
Yep.
through your storytelling, which we'd hope it wouldn't happen.
Exactly.